Welcome to part 2 of the OnPage SEO module, where we're going to talk about content optimization. Now, as always, if you didn't watch the previous video, I highly recommend you go back and watch that because it explained a lot of the fundamentals of OnPage SEO that frankly you really won't understand what this video is about if you don't know what we mentioned again previously. Now in this video specifically, I want to dive a little bit deeper into what we mentioned and go a little bit past the best practices into a little bit more nuanced strategy. Now here's an idea for you guys to start this topic off. In an ideal situation, I'm saying this is perfect, but what Google are striving to achieve is that the best piece of content will rank. Now again, does that mean that the best piece of content will always rank? Absolutely not, on no level. You see sometimes just really bad piece of content ranking really well. But generally speaking, in an ideal situation, the ideal outcome, and what Google is striving to achieve is that the best piece of content will rank. And sure, there are other factors that go into this. Of course, we all know this, but the ideal outcome for us is that the best piece of content will rank, and then we own that best piece of content. So the question that comes out of this, if the best piece of content will rank again in that ideal situation, how do we create the best piece of content? How do we define what is the best piece of content? Well, in the last video, I kind of introduced this idea of relevance, intent, engagement, and basically just looking through the fundamentals of on-page SEO, which is a great starting point. And I really think for the most part, a lot of this does come down to relevance, intent, and engagement, as mentioned previously. But well, that is just a starting point, and there is a lot more that goes into it. So in this video, I kind of want to dive deeper into these concepts and really dive deep into how exactly you would do this. Now again, recapping real quick, intent is really easy once you understand the philosophy behind it. You want to investigate basically what is the intent, what is the search intent of someone looking for this keyword. For example, are they looking for information? Are they looking to buy something? Are they looking are they investigating before buying something later? Are they looking for a local business? Like, what is the intent behind this search? Diving deeper into that, you also have the overall kind of content type. For example, yeah, sure, it's information, but is this a roundup post? Is this like a short how-to guide? Or is this like a really long, detailed, like super monster guide how to do something, right? What type of content ranks that's within this intent? And even within that, you can look at things, say, sentiment. Okay, is this a positive article, right? Is this positive reviews or is it negative reviews? Because every single review is negative. Unfortunately, you probably want to have a negative review also because that is just the sentiment that Google likes for this keyword, okay? That is intent, and that is pretty easy, right? So let's say that covers intent. Again, we could talk for hours on this, but I think it's enough detail for now. So that leaves out relevance and engagement. And engagement is very important, but realistically, it doesn't matter if you have engaging content if you don't have any traffic, right? So let's focus on relevance first, and then when we start ranking maybe page 2, page 1, then we'll start looking into how can we increase the engagement, because when you're on page 1 especially, that can directly influence the rankings. But starting off with relevance, let's get into it. And here's a question for you. What makes one piece of content better than another from a relevancy point of view, right? And that is basically the question I posed to you at the beginning. If you have a look at these results right here, you have rank and rent. So if you search rank and rent, these come up, right? And the first one is a rank and rent SEO guide. The second one is a rank and rent SEO guide. And the third one is, guess what? A rank and rent SEO guide. So how do we determine from this which guide is better? Which guide is the best piece of content? Well, that is a very difficult thing to do, and in the olden days, Google were pretty bad at it, and today they're continually improving. If you have a look at the past few years of ranking updates, you'll see updates like RankBrain, BERT, the passage ranking update, and various different things like this designed to help Google better understand your content. It's not just about like how many words are on a page, right? You can't just write more words on the page and say, okay, this is better, because that doesn't make it better, right? You can't just increase the density. You can't just say, okay, well, I have the keyword 5 times and you have it 2 times, so my article is better. That's outdated SEO, and Google are trying to improve their algorithms to better understand the content, so it's more than just these basics and fundamentals. So what it really comes down to, I believe, is what we call like topical relevance or topical coverage, or really both, right? And what it means is how much content you have covering this topic on both the page itself, but also on other pages on the site, on your overall website, right? You can't just have one single blog post about this topic because that's not in depth on the topic. Sometimes you need 300, 400, sometimes you need 1,000 or more to really fully cover this topic in depth, right? So it's the relevance and coverage on the page itself, but also the entire website as a whole. Now let me give you guys a quick example. This is an iPhone 12, apparently. I think they all look the same, but apparently this is the iPhone 12. Now imagine you are writing a review of the iPhone 12 and, well, you didn't mention the camera. It'd be very, very strange, you know? So I actually had a look. I checked out the reviews of iPhone 12s, and guess what? Every single one of them, of course, has a section dedicated to the camera. Like not just a little note within the content, but literally a heading or subheading relevant to cameras and about cameras. So if you wanted to rank for iPhone 12 review and you didn't have this same thing, then you would not be able to rank. It's as simple as that. You stand out because it's different, and Google could understand the content that all these sites have this topic and yours doesn't. Well, there's an issue there at hand, okay? So that is something that you absolutely want to make sure you're doing, okay? Now, here's how you would do that. It's really simple. You would go ahead and search for a keyword. I searched for best massage chair. I grabbed a top ranking site, and I just listed a handful, right, a little bit more than a handful, but a bunch of subheaders they have on their page. Now, I could list significantly more than this because it's a very, very detailed piece of content, but I think it's enough to get my point across. If you don't have a topic on the types of massage chairs, then your content isn't as good as theirs, presuming, and this is the presumption here, that it matches the intent. Because if you have an e-commerce page and you start going into 5,000, 10,000 words explaining different types of this and features of this and stuff, possibly that isn't the correct intent. It just depends. And again, look at your competitors for indicators of what is actually working. But basically, if you were to want to rank for this keyword, you want to look at the top ranking competitors and see, okay, what subheadings do they have? What topics do they have? And basically, what do they mention in their content? Because that is clearly working for them. And again, this isn't only on the page itself, that's a great starting point. It's also site-wide, again, because if you just have one blog post or one page about massage chairs, you have nothing else about chairs and nothing else about massage products or anything of that kind, you probably don't have relevance to this topic. You probably don't have enough coverage of this overall topic, okay? Another thing you can look into is things like you see on this website here, they have the FAQ section, like what is a massage chair? What does a massage chair do? And so on like this. Well, you can find these by, again, looking at your competitors, but also looking at things like the people also ask section within Google search results, right? And just compiling all this information and creating a really detailed, in-depth piece of content that covers this topic as a whole. Again, Google are looking at how well you cover this topic. Now again, you do need to do this with intent in mind. If I'm looking to find out what the weather is outside right now, I don't need a history lesson in the weather, how people measure it and all this sort of stuff. I don't care how the weather is measured, I just want to know what it is, you know? So you also have to do this with intent in mind, but presuming it is, then you want to have a detailed piece of content, again, on this topic. Now, the way I do this is using a tool called Surfer, which I'm going to break down exactly how exactly I use that. So let's open it up and let's run through it. Okay, the first way you can do this inside of Surfer is using their content editor tool, which I'm currently using right now. And essentially what they allow you to do is you write your content within this tool. And if you look down the sidebar here, it pretty much recommends how exactly you would optimize your content. Now the first thing you want to do is in the settings, when you're setting this up, you want to make sure you select the right types of competitors. In this case, I've unselected kind of roundup types, I think. I don't know, I've just a quick example. And basically trying to find more detailed guides that, again, similar type of content. Again, this is a detailed guide. So a roundup like 5 template ideas, well, doesn't match the intent of what we're trying to do in terms of the type of content, okay? So basically just make sure you have the right intent selected in terms of the correct competitors that are similar intent to you. Now closing this, once you're in here, you're going to have your content score, which is just a helpful indicator. But realistically, what you want to look into is these terms down here, and also the topics can be quite helpful also. Now what this will suggest is the average range of words they recommend, which is in this range, or actually slightly over in this case, the number of headings they recommend, number of images, and so on. Now what I really like is this little section here, which is basically terms they recommend included. So for example, they recommend that you include the word how to write in mail, LinkedIn messages, LinkedIn cold, LinkedIn message in, use LinkedIn, messages, people, a message on LinkedIn, and so on. These are all phrases or terms that they recommend that we include within this article. Now, when I'm doing a light optimization, meaning the first run of content, I'm not super fussed on hitting the exact ranges. I mean, if you have a look at this, they say that they recommend having messaging between 9 and 23 times, or LinkedIn cold between 3 and 9 times. Now that is great for full-on optimization, but when we're initially writing content, again I don't do this, but when I hire writers to write content for me, I don't particularly care whether exactly 3 to 9, it doesn't particularly matter. I just want to get the words in there at least once, the phrase in there at least one time, just to hit that overall topical relevance. Because again, going back to that camera example, the iPhone, if we don't have anything in there about that, then it's going to be a very, very difficult time to rank. When you combine this with the initial research that we do in terms of checking out our competition and writing down all the topics they cover, all the subheadings and different things like that, the FAQ, all that good stuff like that, and you combine that with this, then you have a really well optimized page that covers really everything on this overall topic that matches the correct intent. So that is the purpose behind this. It's just getting started initially, and then what we'll do is we'll give this some time, right? Because we don't just want to create one blog post or one page, because again, we need to have topical coverage. So we create this post first, and then we create the other content, and we do the same process once again, and then we wait, and we give it a little bit of time, and we see what happens. And while we're waiting, we're doing things, right? We're building internal links, we're building backlinks, we're doing other best SEO practices, and then we revisit it later and say, okay, hey, this one isn't quite ranking where we want it to be yet, let's do some further optimization, and let me show you how exactly I would do that. Another tool Server have that's really helpful is their audit tool. Now I like to use this for existing content or for just revisiting that content that we wrote previously. So I'm just going to quickly run through how exactly we'd use this. I put in here e-commerce SEO as the keyword. You can put in multiple keywords, and then put in a URL here. Again, other blog posts we have on e-commerce SEO that isn't optimized whatsoever, it just wrote the content, right? Now next up, we're going to select the correct country, and then also the device. Is it mobile or desktop? For most of the time these days, you're going to have mobile. Let's just leave it at desktop now, but it depends on which type of visitor you're trying to attract the most of. And again, for a lot of sites, it's usually mobile first, not desktop. But do that, and then NLP stands for natural language processing. It just suggests additional keywords that uses Google's NLP tool. It's suggested to have that on. It costs a little bit more for the credits, but I recommend it, okay? Once this is all done, click Run Audit with NLP. Now this is going to take a minute or so, usually between like 30 to 60 seconds to run. So we're going to cut this video and we'll continue once it's done. So at this point the audit is done, and here is how it looks. You see all this information down here just like this. Now first up, before we start using this, I need to select competitors. So you need to double check that this is correct. Now what we need to do is, again, just double check that we have competitors that are a similar type of intent to ours. In this case, this is a guide in e-commerce SEO. That's correct. A guide in e-commerce SEO. This is correct. This one is not. So the top rated e-commerce SEO company that is not the same type of intent is going to skew the data. Ultimate guide to SEO for e-commerce sites. That is correct. And so on, right? We're just going to go through this. E-commerce SEO, Shopify, that makes sense. This is probably correct, but I don't know. This should leave it out because I can't bother to check. This is good. This is a guide. This is good. And I think this is all good. I think actually Mars is probably okay as well, but the word count is lower, so let's just leave it out. What this is going to do is it's basically going to check those competitors and tell us what to do based on what those competitors are doing. So you can see here, here's terms they recommend using. Really, really simple, okay? Here's the word count. They recommend need to expand the content. Actually, we need to add an additional at least 1,400 words to the content, right? Or within paragraphs, at least 1,400. So a significant amount of additional content. They recommend add more within the H2 to H6, as in the subheadings. Add more words in bold. And then exact keywords. They recommend add a little bit more, not much, but a little bit more on the exact keywords per 100 words of body, and so on. This is how Surfer works. Now, what I'm going to do here is a very light optimization first, okay? So here's what I would do when I just want to lightly optimize a page, and I can basically train someone to do this really easily without being like a super advanced SEO or SEO and analyst level at really understanding what's going on, okay? So what I want to do first is, number one, check the word count, okay? Check the word count and then word count in paragraphs, and see if we need to expand the content or remove the content. In certain cases, we need to actually reduce the content a little bit. But that's the first check, because really before we dive into anything else, we want to check, okay, do we have enough content on here? And if we don't have enough content, then again, revisit the competitors, revisit the subheadings, even look in these phrases here and just figure out what content can we cover? What can we talk more about to expand the content on this page? Presuming that is correct, which it isn't now, but presuming it is, then we're going to move on to the next thing, which is I like to look at the keyword density basically of the exact keyword, because it's another quick, easy fix. Basically, we say, okay, increase this or decrease this. We just go ahead and just mention the keyword again another time in the content, and also the partial keyword is further down here. Again, they recommend 0.6 to 1.47 times additional per 100 words in the body. So again, I don't know how many words it says, maybe 5,000, but go ahead and mention the partial keyword, the exact keyword, a few more times in the content. Very simple, easy fix to do. When you do that, click refresh up here. If you go up here and click refresh, it's going to refresh this data and it'll tell you if you've done it correctly, just so you can make it really, really easy. Again, I don't do this. I pay people to do this type of thing for me. Now, beyond that, this terms to use section is really where we want to get going with that whole topical relevancy thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll into this, and you can see here, it has loads of suggestions like add something, this is all good, add with like a warning, not necessarily an error, and so on. Good. And some of them say remove. So you see remove. I have duplicate content mentioned 10 times in my article, but they recommend you only want to have that 4 to 8 times. So we're over, so they recommend removing it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click this little action column here, and it's going to sort by the errors at the top. And all I want to do first is increase the topical relevancy, which means that all of these words here, I don't have e-commerce in this exact form. I think I have e-commerce without the space or with a dash or something like that in there. But I don't have e-commerce written like this at all, and they recommend 15 to 96 times. Or e-commerce business I don't have, they recommend 1 to 3 times. Notice this is the NLP. This is using, again, Google's natural language processing tool to make these suggestions. Again, search engine optimization. Apparently I don't have, I probably do have it, but I spell it the British way, not the American way. But again, that makes sense. They have it. They recommend 2 to 7 times. And all these ones here that say ads, and I have 0, I'm just going to go through and add all of them. And the reason, again, I'm going to do that is because I want to increase the overall topical relevancy. So I'm going to mention long tail keywords, social media. Again, I'm going to skip take a look. It doesn't count, right? It doesn't matter anything. Search volume, I'm going to mention search volume. Site structure, apparently I don't mention that. Again, that's highly relevant, right? If I don't have site structure mentioned in my e-commerce guide, then that guide is probably better than mine because theirs mentions it, okay? So it's just hidden that overall topical relevance. So that is the first phase of using this. So once this is all done, as mentioned previously, I want to give it a little bit of rest and time. I want to leave the site a little bit, the page a little bit, focus on our other content, because I really want to do this at scale. Again, having one blog post about a topic isn't topical coverage. You need more. You probably need 50, 100, 200, 500 or more, right? So I want to focus really not only on optimizing this page really well, but also really on volume and quantity of content, because again, just having one page isn't enough. So I'm going to do this light optimization just to get it done, just to get it optimized, and then move on to the next page and the next page and the next page, and try and churn out as much content as I can of a decent level of quality. Then, and only then, I'm going to give that some time, maybe it's going to be a month later or so, and then we're going to revisit this and say, how can we better optimize this page? And that is really the next phase. So what can we do then? We can go back into Surfer, we can go back into the audit tool, and you can see here, again, the same suggestions as previously, but now we can start looking more into this and say, hey, we only added e-commerce one time because we just wanted to do it one time just to get the relevancy in there. Now let's see if we can increase it to 15 to 96 times just to get, again, more relevancy. So increase that a little bit. A guide to SEO, that's going to increase that from 1, which it would be if you did that work already, to 8 times or 10 times and so on. And repeat that whole process for all of these. Likewise, the ones that say remove, let's actually listen to that now and let's remove this a little bit because we mentioned this too much. And again, it's not the correct intent. It doesn't matter. We have a ton of content on duplicate content, but let's reduce this a little bit overall to be in line with what's working for our competition. Right, same for another removal here. I mentioned title tag 14 times. Hey, that's a little bit much. Let's reduce that a little bit more, and so on, and actually refining our usage of phrases. You can also do the same thing for words. It's a little bit less important, but just something that you might want to double check, and just going through this list of words and saying, okay, increase the usage of Google, right? Or some of them queries you don't mention whatsoever, and just so on, and checking the words. You can also look at making some structural tweaks here. So for example, if you scroll down to where it says the heading is somewhere in here, then the overall structure, hey, increase the number of paragraph elements, increase the number of images, increase the number of bold elements, right? Increase the number of subheadings possibly, in this case we don't need to. And different things like that, and also increasing the content within each of these areas, so content within subheadings, content within bold, and so on. And then making further refinements to the exact keyword usage. Can we increase it very, very slightly or reduce it? We already do that in the initial run, but we don't go too detailed with it. But later on, we can try and make some additional refinements to this. And that's basically like analyzing the more intricate details on this, and also the SERP Analyzer tool later if we want to get even more advanced to that. I won't go into that in this video. Then we can really try and refine the page once we're already giving it some time and it's not in the position we want it to be. Now, sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes you have the intent correct, so you have a light optimization and just best practices, and that's enough, and you already start ranking on page 1. But if it's not enough and you're not ranking where you want to be, then you can dive a little bit deeper into their audit tool and again the SERP Analyzer tool and really see how to optimize your content even better. Again, looking at what is actually working for your competition. And if nothing else, guys, this is really important for, again, topical relevance. And beyond that is also just making sure you don't stand out. If your competitors all have, say, 500 to 1,000 words and you have 10,000 words, well, there's something a little bit fishy going on because it's completely different to what is working. So again, just looking at really what is working for your competitors and just kind of matching similar to what they are doing. Now, once you're ranking pretty well, ideally like the first page, and engagement is going to become much, much more important. So how do you increase the engagement of your content? Well, here is two main ideas for you. That is readability and CTR, which stands for click-through rate. So let me start with readability, then we'll go into the next one, okay? Readability can be things like multimedia. That means images, videos, and everything within your content, breaking up all that paragraphs, that text, and everything like that. It could be a table of contents. If you ever checked out any review guide, you'll probably see like a little table of contents that says, okay, here's what's upcoming. So you can just click and jump to the different sections. So you don't need to scroll through 10,000 words to try and find what you're looking for. It could also be spelling and grammar. If you ever open a blog post and the first sentence you look at has like a spelling error or some grammar mistakes, well, it can be a little bit annoying. It kind of signals that maybe this isn't the best quality content. Now, does that mean that people don't have mistakes in the content? Absolutely not. But again, if this is like full of spelling and grammar mistakes, that will absolutely destroy the readability and the engagement of your content. Design is another important aspect where people don't really talk much about this in the SEO space, but it really does make a difference. If your site looks really bad, it's really difficult to read, the font is ugly, the font is small, the letter spacing is really small or too big, the line spacing is too big, and all this sort of stuff like this, it can actually make a really big difference to how readable, again, your content is, which is a design aspect, but actually influences SEO because, again, engagement also matters. So make sure you have a good design. Just invest in good quality themes, or if you have a bigger site, then decent developers and designers that can make an awesome functional site for you. More than just writing good content, this all ties together really, really well. And then also thinking about things like above the fold, meaning that is what you see on your screen before you need to scroll down. If you visit your blog post and it's supposed to be a review, and all you can see is a gigantic image and a headline, well, that isn't really that great of an experience because I have to scroll down before I even know if this is that interesting to me. So by having the right content above the fold, that can also, again, influence the engagement and readability. And then a final idea for you is spacing. Now, I kind of mentioned this in terms of design and fonts and everything like that, and that absolutely matters too. But I'm referring to specifically here is just spacing out your content, meaning having quotes here, having subheadings, and just breaking up the paragraphs. Have you ever tried to read someone's comment on like Facebook or YouTube, and they just comment like 1,000-word article, and there's no paragraph breaks or anything, and it's just a mess, and you expect people to actually read that? It is insanity. Okay, so make sure you're spacing out your content, your paragraphs, stuff like that, so it's actually readable. Now, my original intention in this video was to go through every single one of these and show an example of what every single one of them meant, but frankly, we're low on time and I don't want to drag out this video too long, so if you want to know what any of these are, just Google them, but I think you already get the point already. Now, beyond that, there is also SERP CTR, which I mentioned previously, right? If your site ranks lower than your competitors, but you have a more compelling title and other elements like that, you can actually get a better click-through rate than they can, which is actually great. If you're, say, position 3, you can get more traffic than position 1 if your site is better. But beyond that, it can also influence your rankings, because if Google sees that, hey, the site ranking number 2 is getting all the traffic and not site number 1, hey, maybe they want to change those rankings a little bit, you know? So click-through rate can be optimized for in a few different ways. The main ideas for you really here are your title tag, your meta description, and your structured data. Now, title tag, again, can you include some sort of benefits or hook that gets people to just look at your page more so than the competitors? Can you hook them in and draw them to read the meta description with your title tag? Can you write a meta description that is more compelling, lists better benefits, has a better call to action, sounds more interesting than the competitors? Again, treat this all as an advertisement. And the final thing here is structured data. Are there any unused structured data opportunities with your page? Now, if you don't know what this is, let me explain. Structured data is essentially, it sounds really dumb, a way of describing data. Now, that is the least helpful description ever, but let me get into it, okay? So for SEO, structured data is a way of helping search engines to better understand your content. Now, rather than try and explain this in really technical terms, because it just gets complicated, let me just show you, okay? So the most common way you'll see this is with review schema, which is things like this, where you see review or rating schema. You see here, rating 4.8, 1,466 reviews, right? You see this all over the place. It's very, very common with e-commerce. You see this all the time. And even with other types of sites as well, you see reviews and ratings. Now, these days, it's a little bit harder to do this in the sense that you can't just add the code and you immediately start ranking like we used to a few years ago, which is really, really great. But this definitely has a huge impact in the number of clicks to your page versus the competitors if they don't have it. Now, that is just one example. You can also have a lot more information added here. So you can see here you have ratings and number of votes, but you also have the price and you also have the stock level in here. And that's just a simple example. Beyond that, there is actually much, much more than that. There is also structured data for recipes and honestly hundreds of other things just like that. Now, the way people do this is by using something called Schema. Schema is a standardized vocabulary of structured data. What does that mean? It's basically just standardized phrases and terms that using to describe your content, right? So you have the product schema, article schema. In fact, here's a bunch of them right here: article, organization, breadcrumb, FAQ, video, and so on. And these are basically vocabularies, as in terms you can use to mark up content on your page to say, hey, you know this piece of content right here, this is actually a movie, or this is a product. And within this is the product name, this is the product price, and this is the product stock levels, or something different like that, right? You're basically describing this to search engines or to whoever, right? It's basically describing that content. Now, implementation of this can be done in a few different ways. The most common two types, I believe, are basically where you mark up the existing code with something like microdata, where you basically just already have that code on your page, and you just mark that up with some schema to say, hey, this is the phone number, this is the email, this is the address, this is the product name, this is the product price, and so on. But you can also use something called, and I have no idea how to pronounce this, I just read this, is JSON LD. Now, I have no idea if that's supposed to be JSON or JSON, or I have no idea. It doesn't matter, but basically that is probably the easiest way of doing this, where you basically just generate a better code with all the information you want, you paste this in your page, and then it's done. You don't need to go in there and like modify the code or anything like that. It is just really simply just pasting in a little bit of code on your pages. Now, if you're using something like WordPress, they add a lot of this by default, and there's plugins that help you do that also. If you're using something like Shopify, again, they add a lot of this by default. So really, it's actually a lot easier today than it ever was, but just look into it and just make sure that you're correctly using it on pages to the best of the page's extent. And again, this isn't something that you need to do from day one, because if you're not ranking whatsoever, then even if you have this, then it's not really going to help you do anything, because it's really about CTR more than anything else. And if no one's seeing your page ranking anyway, then having an FAQ behind it, having reviews next to it, and all this sort of stuff is going to make no difference, because nobody's going to see it anyway. Okay, so reserve this for when you're ranking a little bit better, but it is something you do to increase the overall clicks and traffic to your website again later, which potentially could lead to better rankings as a result of that engagement. Now, once you've done this, you want to use a tool like Google's structured data testing tool, and my editor can show here how exactly that looks. and it basically allows you to test and confirm that the structured data is set up correctly and show what exactly is there already. For example, if you don't already know what WordPress or Shopify, whatever is already doing for your site, then literally run it through this tool and see what they're doing. And also you can decide after that if there's any opportunities that are missing. Now, with that said, let's wrap up this video. Again, I could talk for hours now to optimize content, and I probably will in future content, but that is enough because I'm absolutely knackered, and I think this is enough information for this video. In the next video, we're going to go into internal linking, which is a huge part of it that really ties in really well with this, because we talked about topical coverage today and having sufficient level of blog posts and content around this topic, not again only on the page but also other pages. And where that ties in really well is, well, internal linking, because you want to link all those different blog posts and content pieces together. So that is what we're going to cover in the next video. It's a huge topic. It's a very easy sort of quick win for most businesses with existing content and pages and backlinks and all that good stuff. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. So with that said, I hope you've enjoyed this content. If you have, can you do me a quick little favor? Give that like button below a little tap, just so I know that you're liking this type of content, and just to appeal to my vanity for spending hours upon hours upon hours creating this course so far, and many more to come, unfortunately. With this said, again, I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you have any questions, anything I missed out, leave a comment below, I'll answer all of them. And aside from that, I will see you in my next video.